ahead and get us started. And good afternoon, everyone. And thank you all for joining us for today's grant solicitation webinar, OJJDP FY19 Opioid Affected Youth Initiative. My name is William Moore, and I am with the National Training and Technical Assistance Center. As your technical host, I would like to take a couple of minutes to discuss a few features of the Adobe Connect webinar platform and provide a few announcements to keep in mind. Please note that this event is being recorded and will be published on NTTAC's YouTube page. The webinar recording will be archived on NTTAC's YouTube channel, where you can also view past webinars for the event, transcript, and supporting materials. Please contact the OJJDP NTTAC Help Desk. For those wishing to download a copy of the PowerPoint slides and other important documents, you may do so by locating the handouts pod directly above the chat area. Here, you will also find an FAQ for webinar participants that will likely address any technical related questions. Click on the file name and click on the download button. During today's webinar, presenters will address questions during our Q&A segment of the webinar. Kathy will address questions during our Q&A segment of the webinar. Please type in your questions into the chat box as they arise. For those of you participating in the webinar as a group, please take a minute to help us count. Go to the chat window and type the total number of additional people in the room with you today. If you are viewing alone, there is no need to type anything at this time. Again, go to the chat window and type the number of additional people in the room with you today. If you are viewing by yourself, there's no need to type anything into the chat box at this time. And I'll give folks a couple of minutes to go ahead and type their additional individuals. Following today's webinar, attendees will be sent a certificate of attendance. This certificate is sent approximately 1 hour following the conclusion of the event and is sent via an Adobe Connect thank you email. Please keep an eye out for your email for the certificate, and please note that participants registered and signed in will receive the certificate. At the conclusion of today's webinar, you will be provided with a link to a brief evaluation about today's presentation. The feedback you provide is used to assist in future planning and training. I will now turn the grant solicitation over to our moderator, Kathy Mitchell, for today's webinar.
Thank you, William. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kathy Mitchell. I am a program manager with the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, and I will be managing this program, the Opioid Affected Youth Initiative, for 2019. So welcome. Thank you for joining me today. During the webinar, we will go over a description of the program. We'll talk about awards made and eligibility requirements. We'll also discuss goals and objectives, and then we'll talk a little bit about the application process. There'll also be time at the end for questions. So throughout the webinar today, I'll be referring to the solicitation quite frequently. If you would like to follow along during those particular aspects of the webinar, you might want to click on the solicitation, or you can just go to your search engine and type in FY19 OJJDP Opioid Affected Youth, and that should bring the solicitation right up. So when I point out particular aspects of the announcement, you'll have that readily available. And keep in mind that applications are due on May 7th. So what is this program about? This is a 3-year grant program which will fund states to develop data-driven, coordinated responses to identify and address problems that have been impacting those due to opioid abuse, misuse. And the targeted demographic for this program will be youth and community safety. Program activities include working with OJJDP and the technical assistance provider to develop data collection tools that will inform strategies and programs to address these challenges. So we will make this award in the form of a cooperative agreement. So technically that's different from a grant in that there is a lot of room for substantial federal involvement. What that generally means is that if you are awarded a cooperative agreement, you have a lot more collaboration with your federal partners, a lot of collaboration with the technical assistance provider. But much like a grant, we are still here to support you and help you as you pursue your goals and objectives. In some cases, because it is a collaborative relationship, we might request that you redirect the project if we feel that it's getting off course. So it just means that it's really a partnership, more so than you might have with a grant. And of course, if you have additional questions about what constitutes a cooperative agreement, you can go to the OJP Grant Application Resource Guide, which is referenced at the bottom of your slide. So we expect to make up to 7 awards. Each award will be awarded at $1 million. The total amount awarded for the entire program is $7 million. Your start date for your projects will be October 1, and they will last for 36 months. So eligibility. Eligible applicants are limited to states. This includes units of local government, tribal nations, and all subrecipients and also recipients, including nonprofit organizations, must forego any profit or management fee. OJJDP will consider applications under which 2 or more entities would carry out the federal award. However, only one entity might be the applicant. And under this solicitation, only one application by any particular applicant entity will be considered. An entity, however, may be proposed as a subrecipient in more than one application. There's a lot to unpack there. If you all have any questions about eligibility, you can type them into the chat box. So this is something new that we've started with our solicitations. It's encouraging program investments in economically distressed communities, which we call qualified opportunity zones. This is discussed in the solicitation, so you can certainly refer to it more there. But it basically means that we are giving priority consideration in our award decisions to those whose projects will directly benefit any disaster areas. If you would like to know what qualifies as a disaster area, you can visit this link below, which takes you to the U.S. Department of Treasury's resource webpage. And you can also go to page 7 of the solicitation for this announcement for additional details. So goals and objectives. So this program supports states, units of local government, and tribal governments in implementing data-driven strategies and programs through strategic partnerships. 3 overarching goals involve developing multidisciplinary task forces or working groups, collecting and interpreting data, and then implementing services based upon the data that's been collected. Awarded sites will work in partnership with representatives from law enforcement, education, probation, community supervision, juvenile court, mental health service providers, medical physicians, examiners, prosecutors, community-based organizations that address substance abuse, child welfare agencies, child protective services, first responders, and other community health agencies. These goals and objectives and deliverables are directly related to the performance measures that demonstrate the results of the work completed. And we'll discuss performance measures later on in the webinar. So if you would like to see a list of the performance measures, they are found on page 19 at the bottom of the solicitation in Appendix A. The goals and objectives and deliverables, as I mentioned in the previous slide, are directly related to those listed in the performance measurement table. And so applicants are not required to submit this data right now. And so although you see it in the solicitation, you're not required to be responsive to that table in your application, but you will be required to report on these data elements should you become awarded. For more information about OJP's performance measurement, you can visit this link here on your screen, www.ojp.gov/performance, overview of performance measurement activity. So a little information about file names. So those of you who have applied for funding before are probably quite well aware of this aspect of submitting application components into the grants.gov. And so just to ensure that the file names are descriptive, we recommend using really just appropriate common sense file names. I know a lot of files or a lot of documents have a lot of extensions and a lot of information that makes sense to your locality in your organization, but it doesn't make sense to us. So it might be, you might have your project name in there, and then you'll have abstract, and then you'll have some other mentionings in the file name. It's best, I think, to keep it very short. And so all of the components with your application will be attached to your organization. And so it's okay to call a program narrative, and that's it. It's okay to call the budget, and that's it. It's okay to call the abstract, logic model, or what have you. It really is okay to just leave it at that. Because they're all grouped together and there's no way it would ever be separated from your organization. So my recommendation is to keep the file names short. If you have to attach the name of your organization to the file name, so for example, DOJ_program narrative, then that's fine. But I wouldn't put too many words into the file name. So logic models are not mandated, but they're very helpful. And oftentimes, if an applicant does not include a logic model, we might request it once they become awarded. And so it just gives a nice framework of how you envision your project to run. They, as you see on the screen, are considered to be theories of change or program matrix, but it's a tool used by managers and evaluators to determine the effectiveness of your project. And it's also really helpful for us and the reviewers as well to have this key component as part of your application. So continuing about logic models, if you want to see any examples, you can visit this link at the bottom of the slide. Just be mindful that it is a way to illustrate your project performance and effectiveness, and it's just helpful in giving us a clear idea of what you're proposing to do. Budget. So we have combined, I think maybe this might be the second or third year that we've done this. We've combined the budget detail worksheet and the budget narrative in a single document, and we collectively refer to this as the budget detail worksheet. You can access that information on this link at the bottom of the screen. I think that there might also be a link within the program solicitation. A couple of people have inquired about information referencing the budget found in grants.gov, and I always want to redirect applicants to whatever is listed in the solicitation. That is what you want to pay close attention to. So continuing on with the budget, you can see the budget preparation and submission information section of the OJP Grant Application Resource Guide for more details. So the Grant Application Resource Guide is just a really robust place where you can find a lot of different information pertaining to the application and then OJP funding at large. This link is listed here on my slide, but it's also listed quite a few times throughout the solicitation. So let's talk a little bit about the specifics, some other details about your application. And for this discussion, I'm going to go directly to the solicitation. So for those of you who have the program solicitation up on your screen, you can go to page 9, where this is section D. It's called Application and Submission Information. And I'll just do a brief overview of some of the elements that make up a competitive application for funding. So the first is going to be the 424. The 424 is basically the space sheet. It is something that you do through grants.gov, and it basically has the name of your institution, the project title, how much you're applying for, and all of the basic ingredients. Next, we have the project abstract. So the project abstract is just going to be a brief summation of your program or your project in 400 words or less. Next, you'll have the narrative. The narrative is going to be a more detailed description of what you plan to do. We like to see data, numbers, that you've conducted a thorough needs assessment, and that you've kind of laid out the landscape of what you're seeing in your community as it relates to opioids and substance abuse. And so then you'll have some different components on page, this is page 11, that talks a little bit about what you want to include with your narrative. So you want to talk about your program design. You want to talk about, if you are awarded, how you plan to implement your project. You want to discuss or include the logic model and the timeline. So the logic model and the timeline, as I mentioned earlier, they're not mandatory, but they are helpful to have. And so if you don't include them with your application, these are two documents that more than likely will be requested should you become awarded. So letters of support. So letters of support is something else that's not mandatory, but it's very helpful. It's helpful for us to know that you have the support and the backing of community partners, perhaps someone in law enforcement, perhaps a local university. Some of the partners might be willing to help you with implementation, and then some letters of support may just, underscoring the fact that they are confident that if you are awarded, you have the capacity to fulfill the goals and objectives of this program. So they're always really helpful to have. So I'm going to go back to the slides now that we've gone over different components of the application. And so you can find additional information about the program announcement online. I have several links on the screen. We have frequently asked questions page. Of course, there's the link to the solicitation, and then you can find other funding details that are going to be discussing the money that we're going to be giving out, the program start date, and other little tidbits. And then at the bottom, you'll see general information on applying for OJJDP awards there. So this is a wealth of information that you'll be able to find by going to any of these links. And so that concludes my portion of the webinar. We will now turn it over to you guys, and you can feel free to ask any questions that you may have. We probably won't get to all of the questions during this webinar, but we do have a response center that is set up to assist applicants with any additional questions.
Great. Thank you, Kathy. And just a reminder to folks, don't forget you can submit your questions in the chat box, as Kathy mentioned. And also, of course, if you have any other additional questions, you can address them at the information located on this slide. So one question, Kathy. Are applicants allowed to have subgrantees under this solicitation? And also, in regards to subgrantees, could a subgrantee include a K-12 educational partnership, for example, a local education agency or a school district?
Yes, applicants can have subgrantees under this grant, and a subgrantee can certainly be a K-12 school or school district.
Fantastic. Great. Another question. So this question is regarding the population or targeted youth population for this solicitation. Are targeted youth required to be in the juvenile justice system already? And then also in addition to that, is there a specific age range that needs to be served under a program funded by the solicitation?
So youth don't have to be in the justice system, and we specifically don't have an age range specified. We're leaving that up to the applicants to determine what that demographic looks like in their area that are most often impacted by opioids.
Great. Okay. So this is a question regarding funding spending. Does funding have to be spent evenly every single year, or can certain years cost more than others?
It's probably expected that certain years will cost more than others. The first year is more than likely going to be your planning year, and then you'll get further and further into your implementation in years 2 and 3. And so we fully expect that each year your budget will look different.
Great. Fantastic. All right. And if I submit, or excuse me, can nonprofits apply to the grant solicitation?
Yes, nonprofit organizations are eligible to apply.
Okay. Right. So if I submit the application over the weekend, how will I know that it was successfully submitted? And then I have a couple of other follow-up questions as well, Kathy. Am I able to retract my submission, or what if I modify my application? And then more importantly, what if I do something like submit 2 applications? Which one will you guys review?
So if you submit it over the weekend, grants.gov will send you an automated message confirming your submission. If there's anything wrong with your submission, they'll also notify you of that as well. Anything in terms of duplicates or redactions, or you want to withdraw, I would reach out to the grants.gov Help Desk directly for assistance with that. But if you do submit more than one application, we will always take the most recent submission. So if you submit one at 10:30 and one at 10:35, we will automatically take the one that was submitted at 10:35.
Okay, great. Thank you. So now could you repeat the date when announcements for this grant solicitation is made?
We typically make announcements to the awarded applicants in September, usually late September, and those who were not awarded generally get notified sometime before the end of the year.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you. So Kathy, it looks like we have some more questions that have been submitted in the audience Q&A here. I'll give you a couple of seconds to look through these questions.
Okay. Thanks, William. Let's see. Is policy work encouraged and considered a service? I'm not sure. So whomever asked this question, if you could expand on it a little bit more. I am not sure what you mean by policy work encouraged and considered a service. I think you might mean in terms of the development of your project, you should be providing a service to the demographic that you've identified. And so it's not a research grant. It's a grant where we're looking for data-driven responses to actually implement services and solutions. So I hope that helps. If not, you can maybe resubmit the question expanding on it a little bit. The next question, does this program include compliance with USC 1373 as a condition for an award as other DOJ programs require? I'm not familiar with what USC 1373 means, so if you could expand on that a little bit. Let me go to I'll go to the program announcement to see if that is referenced anywhere. Okay, it's not. So for the person who's asking about USC 1373, I would either resubmit the question in plain language or you can reach out to the response center and they'll give you a really, really well thought out response, more than I probably can during the time that we have today. So the next question, does the multidisciplinary task force need to be new for the grant, or can existing task forces limit it? It's a really great question. This is a really great question. So you absolutely can have an existing multidisciplinary task force. We will probably want to work with you just to make sure that it's well represented, especially since it's an existing task force and it existed prior to this program. So you would want to demonstrate that it can still be responsive to the specific goals of this solicitation and that it can be focused on youth and families. Can you share examples of what existing grantees are doing? That's a great question. Honestly, our first cohort was awarded in October, so that was just a few short months ago. They were awarded. They went through a long period of budget negotiations, which every new awardee goes through, and they're really in their planning phase. So it's not a lot that I can share that probably would be helpful to you. They are spending probably the next 6 months really going through their planning phase, and because it is an agreement, I'm sorry, did you say something? Okay, I thought I heard something on the phone line. But they really won't have a lot to share until they get into implementation, and they're not going to be in their implementation phase until probably the latter part of the year. But I can tell you that a lot of them came with existing task forces. A lot of them are working with working groups. They have statewide partnerships, and so we're working with them to capture all of these moving parts and then get their data agreements in place so they can kind of hit the ground running once they begin implementation. Universities are eligible to apply. Typically, universities, when they come in as an applicant, they have strong partnerships. So they may come in as a lead applicant, and then they'll have an organizational unit that might be a unit of local government or a unit of some sort of major organization. So we typically see universities come in as partners. They don't have to be the lead applicant. They can certainly be the org unit, and the lead applicant might be a unit of local government. But typically, if the university comes in as a partner, they are the driving engine for this work, so they're not omitted in any way. Can we utilize partner agencies for data collection? Sure, we encourage that. Or must the applicant agency collect the data themselves? No, we certainly encourage partnerships in terms with data collection. Are there certain solicitations for individuals, such as students for dissertations or grant research proposals? I would encourage you to go to OJJDP.gov or even go to OJP.gov to look at all of our funding announcements. We do have NIJ, which is the National Institute of Justice, and they are our research department. And so if you're looking for a grant program that focuses on research, NIJ would be a great place to start. Is this grant awarding up to $800,000 per awardee for 36 months? So this $7 million is the amount that was appropriated to our office by Congress to deal with the opioid epidemic. And we're taking the $7 million and we're dividing it up by 7 awards for $1 million each. And the $1 million is for the entire project period. So you'll spread it out over your 36 months. Grant application says only units of local government can apply. So let's go back to, let's read the eligibility again. Eligible applicants are limited to state, units of local government, comma, and federally recognized tribal governments as determined by the Secretary of Interior. All recipients and subrecipients, I'm on page, I think this is page 3 or 4. All recipients and subrecipients must forego any profit or management fee. There's also a part of the solicitation. Let me see if I can find this page number. So on page, this is page 13, I'm sorry, on page 14, it talks about nonprofit organizations. So an applicant that is a nonprofit organization may be required to make certain disclosures relating to the processes it uses to determine the compensation of its officers, directors, trustees, and key employees. So nonprofit organizations are eligible to apply. You just might have different special conditions as opposed to a unit of local government. And so I'm reading from, so there's eligibility which is listed at the top of the solicitation, and then it drills down even further with information specific to nonprofits on page 14 of the solicitation. So I hope that that answers that question. Can training be included in this grant? So if you are proposing a project and part of that project requires training, perhaps law enforcement personnel, or training some sort of major stakeholder, you can certainly list the training in your budget. It wouldn't preclude you from being funded. If our public health department is intending to apply, can one of the subs serve as their program coordinator? Can one of the subs, I'm not sure what that means, but probably yes. So the public health department, you can appoint or hire whomever you want to be your program coordinator, as long as they have the necessary skill set to fulfill the position's requirement. Opioids the only
Kathy, I think they may have meant their sub-grantees or someone from a sub-grantee on that one.
Oh, okay, that's a really
subs. Subs, yeah, yeah.
Thanks, William. Yes, yes. So if you have a subrecipient, and you want that subrecipient to be the program coordinator, you can do that. You would have to show the contract or the statement of work, but that's possible to do. Are opioids the only drug that can be addressed? No, no. It talks about it. So the focus of the program is opioids, but the project also talks about being data driven. So what you really want to do as you're thinking about the best way to respond to this solicitation is you want to consider what the opioid epidemic looks like in your city or state, and you want to build a needs assessment around what the problem looks like. But as you begin collecting data, if the data reveals a different trend emerging, so if the data reveals it's really not opioids as much as it is Xanax, or it's really methamphetamines or something like that, that's in essence the nature of the solicitation. We're asking grantees, or we're asking states and localities to tell us, we think it's opioids, but let's see what the data looks like. So this is a heavily data-driven problem. It's a data-driven program, and you are collecting data, and then in year 2, you're developing programs and practices to best respond to whatever the data is showing you. And so we think the data is going to be opioids. We think this is an epidemic across the country, but you might come in and say, our data is showing us something different. So obviously in your narrative, we need to see that you have an opioid problem. We need to see that you believe, based on what you're seeing, that you have an opioid problem. But if you are awarded and the data points to something different, we'll kind of have those conversations at that time. If you know at the time of the application that you really do not have an opioid problem, then that can be a little tricky, and that'll be up to the peer reviewers to determine if your project should be funded, given that you've already stated that you're really not seeing opioids as a problem, because opioids should still be a part of your project or program, even if the data is showing that there are other trends emerging. Okay, so USC 1317 refers to immigration. So this particular program announcement doesn't have a clause about immigration. It doesn't have a clause about sanctuary cities. So I would, whoever has posed this question, USC 1373, I would focus on the tenets and the components of this proposal. So we're looking for states to provide data-driven responses and develop collaborative task forces and implement programs to respond to those who've been impacted by the opioid epidemic and drug addiction. And so I would just focus on that and build your proposal around that idea. So I hope that that answers your question. If there are only 7 awards available nationwide, is it not likely that a small rural locality would be awarded a grant? That's an excellent question. You know, rural localities can be just as competitive as larger cities, larger organizations. One thing I always suggest, if you are a small rural area, so the opioid epidemic is huge in rural townships. I always encourage, if you feel like you're a small locality and you're concerned about how competitive your application can be, I would encourage you to think about partnering with maybe a larger organization in your area, partner with maybe a university. Partnerships are really, really strong, and they can really help strengthen your proposal. But this is a competitive process, and so you'll have peer reviewers who will be making funding recommendations. And you may have a peer reviewer that's from a small rural town. So I definitely think that it is certainly possible to be competitive even though you're in a small space. So it says under Section 3C of the grant, can you describe what types of impact you would expect to see described in an application as it relates to children, youth, and families directly impacted by the opioid abuse? So let's go to Section 3. So I'm not sure, I'm not pulling up a Section 3. I'm not sure what Section 3 is, but like if you can give me the title of the section, I can type it in and we can go to that part of the solicitation. But generally, I can tell you that the impact should be on families that have been disengaged because of opioids, children that have been removed from the home because of opioids, school campuses that are feeling the impacts of kids bringing opioids onto school property and selling them, distributing them, using them. This problem is so extensive that you can tackle it from a variety of different possibilities. It really depends on what does the opioid epidemic look like in my area and where are we seeing that problem surface itself. Is it happening in our school district? And if so, let's build a proposal around what we see happening in schools. If it's happening in social service areas where you're seeing a lot of kids come into the social service arena because they've had to be separated by their parents because their parents are addicted to opioids. It's so many ways you can tackle the problem. It's going to come down to what does it look like in your area? And that's only a question you can answer. But make sure you have the data and make sure you do a quality needs assessment when you're developing this proposal. It's different in every state. When I think about the cohort that we funded in FY18, each one of their projects looks different. They're tackling it from a different lens. We have someone from law enforcement, so their program is built upon this is what our officers are seeing in the field, and so we are developing a collaborative approach to address the needs that we're seeing in our officers when they go out to serve the public. So that's going to be specific to what you're seeing in your field. So I'm not going to go over eligibility because it's in the solicitation. If you have additional questions about eligibility beyond what we've already answered and beyond what we discussed during the actual webinar on the slides, I would encourage you to reach out to the Response Center. Their phone number and their email address is listed on the screen, and they are available to assist you with all of your eligibility questions that you might have. The only thing I will say about eligibility is that if you are located within the United States, you should be able to apply for this solicitation, but definitely reach out to the Response Center and they will answer any questions you have about eligibility. Should we include funds in our budget to support a federal technical support provider? That's an excellent question. I would say no. This program already comes with technical assistance that we're providing for you free of charge. And so if you budgeted for it, then that's kind of money that you can save in your pocket. Does the Department of Justice have a list of recommended programs? Whoever asked this question, if you could elaborate, if you could expand on that a little bit. Does the Department of Justice have a list of recommended programs? What kind of recommended programs? What, who, what, when, where, why, how? Give me a little bit more information so I can give you the best answer possible. Given the title of the RFP, it might be uneasy to apply on the basis of another substance. I would agree with that. I may abandon the solicitation if the data does not support it, since your request for proposal is targeted specifically. I would agree with that. If you, I would agree with that. I would agree with that. If you believe that you live in an area where you're not. Did you say something, William?
No, apologies. If you're on the phone and you joined, please make sure that you're on mute. Sorry about that, Kathy. My apologies.
So I would agree with that. If you're living in an area where you're really just not seeing, you're not having an epidemic of opioids, then this probably might not be a solicitation that you want to apply for, because it's going to be hard to compete with other applicants who can demonstrate that they have a problem with opioids in their area. Are you most interested in opioid use by youth, parent, and other caregivers use that impact and other caregivers use and the impact on children or something else? That's a really good question. So we are OJJDP. We are the Office of Juvenile Justice. And so your program should absolutely touch children in some way. But it's a village, right? So it's kids. It's usually their families, their communities, and so certainly projects can have a broad scope where you are definitely targeting youth. Your task force is targeting youth. Your working groups are dealing with youth. They understand that there's a specific focus on youth, but it can also include services that reach their parents, services that promote public safety. So it's all of the above, but the central focus should be on kids. How much should we be identifying and describing the evidence-based potential program intervention, or can we focus more on years 1 and 2, and that program intervention will be determined by task force data? So that's an excellent question. I hesitate to give an answer because I don't want. I think that this question is really going to be subjective. It's really going to depend on what speaks to you as the applicant, based upon what you're seeing in your locality. So does it make sense as you're developing your narrative and as you're thinking about how to best address the opioid problem in your community? You'll have to decide for yourself whether it makes sense to identify it from an evidence-based standpoint or whether it makes sense to deal with it from a program intervention standpoint. So in terms of your question, there is no black or white, right or wrong answer. The good thing I can tell you, however, is that whichever path you choose, because you're a cooperative agreement, this is a partnership. This is a collaboration. So you'll have myself and the technical assistance provider, which is a national provider with lots of expertise across the country to kind of help you work through your project and your narrative. And if you come in with one approach, but then you think midway, we might want to go in a different direction, we're also here to support you in that as well. So it's kind of subjective. Good question, though. How will awards be based or impacted by the quantity of individuals that the grantee proposed program is expected to serve during the grant period? So the awards will be based upon the application. That's it. The reviewers are going to make funding recommendations based upon the information that they reviewed in the application and how it best responds to the solicitation. That's it. So it's not going to be about the quantity of individuals, but I will tell you that capacity is always helpful. So reviewers are going to want to know that if you're proposing a really fantastic project that they feel can really best serve the needs of the juveniles in your area, they are going to want to know that this organization has the capacity to get it done. But capacity is measured in different ways. Sometimes it's measured by the number of people. Sometimes it might be measured by other aspects. So this is another question that I think the best proposals are written based upon what it looks like in your area and the strength and the capacity that you have to best respond to it. Little nuances like the number of people and should we be evidence-based or should we be more intervention, all of that gets worked out, like the pathway to getting there, a lot of that gets worked out after you are awarded. And because things change, sometimes you might make a proposal and then once you're awarded and you actually begin the work, revisions are made. Sometimes there's a change in scope. And so all of that is expected. I would just make sure that however you intend to respond to the solicitation, just make sure that it makes sense from your perspective. So that is the only question. That's the last question that I see. William, do you have any more questions coming in the queue, or have we answered them all?
Looks like these are the questions that have come in so far, Kathy. So yes, it looks like we are at the completion here.
Okay, awesome. Well,
right.
Thank you all so much for joining me today. And again, if you have any questions that we didn't get a chance to answer, or if you think of something later on, you can certainly reach out to our response center for assistance. They will be available until the end of the solicitation period, which is on May 7th. Have a good afternoon.
All right, thank you, Kathy. So thank you all again. And just the last few reminders here. Don't forget that you may contact NTTAC through the website displayed on this slide. You can stay up to date on the latest information by signing up for NTTAC's TTA listserv. Also, don't forget to check us out on Facebook. And you can also contact OJJDP via the Help Desk by following the contact information on this slide. Do you have a TTA need? Please submit a request for help via the OJJDP's TTA 360 platform through the link displayed on this slide. As a reminder, the webinar recording will be archived on NTTAC's YouTube channel, where you can also view past webinars. For the event transcript or supporting materials, please contact the OJJDP TTA Help Desk. And lastly, if you all would, please take 5 minutes to complete the feedback evaluation. Again, thank you all for joining us today. Have a great afternoon.